Hello everybody, Drake Swarm here, Timothy. Hope everybody's doing alright. I'm going to do a couple of these videos, spotlight video for a couple cards in the new set, Oath of the Gatewatch. The first one I'm going to look at is Eldrazi Displacer. I'm just going to do these videos to kind of get a closer look at certain cards I'm really excited about. Eldrazi Displacer is the one I'm most excited about. I think it's absolutely fantastic, even though I haven't gotten to play with it yet, but it has so much potential, and I'm really looking forward to getting a chance to play with it. I will say that this is geared towards limited, so even though I might give a nod towards constructed here and there, I'm mostly talking about draft and sealed. So let's look first at the card and what it does. Eldrazi Displacer is 3 mana for a 3/3, which I've mentioned in other videos is just fantastic. It's just a great vanilla creature on its own. 3/3s for 3 are generally very good, and when they have upside, they're that much better. This format also has a lot of 2/3s in it, which I've mentioned before as well. And 3/3s are just so good against 2/3s, especially when they're at the same point on the curve. There are a couple of 3/2s in the set as well, but 3/2s are that much worse than 3/3s when they don't push against these 2/3s. Now that I've said 2 and 3 1,000 times, we do have to point out the fact that, first off, this is a white devoid card, which is a little awkward because it's the only white colorless creature, the only white Eldrazi between both Battle for Zendikar and Oath of the Gatewatch. So as far as that's concerned, this might not be like the most synergistic card in your white deck, since it's the only white colorless card, and it's actually it's a little bit better off in other decks, but the card's so strong that even if I'm not playing any sort of colorless matters theme, I would jam this in any deck I could play it in, whether it synergizes with the other cards or not. We're going to see all the things that this card can do, and it just does so much on its own with other creatures. It just does so much that it deserves a spot in white decks, despite being kind of this oddball card. Also, it does have the colorless restriction in its ability. The ability is what I'm going to focus on in this video, since that's kind of the driving point of this card, the card that makes it a rare, and the card that just pushes the power level of it. I'm sorry, the part that pushes power level. The activated ability is 2 and a colorless, so 2 of anything and then at least 1 colorless mana. Exile another target creature, then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. Couple keywords. Another means that this guy can't target himself, which I'll talk about later on. Also, does not specify it has to be your creature. And the creature enters the battlefield tapped, which all of those are very, very important things. Now, direct comparisons to pretty much any card that has this kind of blanking effect. Blanking removes something from play and then puts it back eventually, whether it's right away or at the end of turn. Usually they're at the end of turn, but a lot of times you get them right away off of cards like Flicker Wisp's end of turn too, but Restoration Angel comes to mind. But just to give you an idea of blink cards, we get them all the time. It's a very, it's actually not that common in draft or limited that you get a blink type effect because of how strong they really are. Skybind is the last one I can remember that was in a block set, and that was in Journey into Nyx. Skybind was not very good in its own set just because, first off, it could only target your own things. It couldn't target enchantments, and half the cards were enchantments, and it just cost so much by itself and was hard to get going and didn't really synergize with Bestow or Monstrosity or any of the other things going on. It was good with Constellation, but Skybind never really got there. Cards like Flicker Wisp and Otherworldly Journey are pretty good cards in their own formats. Each of these was reprinted in one of the Modern Master sets kind of recently, and then cards like Conjurer's Closet, and we could go on and make a list of all the cards that blink. Conspiracy had some in Brago and Glimmerpoint Stag, so on and so forth. But just to show you that blinking comes in all sorts of forms. What we've got with Eldrazi Displacer is kind of closer to one of these two, where it's on a creature instead of an artifact or enchantment. And Eldrazi Displacer ability can be activated at any time, so it's kind of like instant speed. Obviously, your blink effects are a lot better when they're at instant speed because they let you do so much more things. whereas something like Flicker Wisp can only be done on your turn when you're casting the card. But yeah, we've got Eldrazi Displacer is not as flexible as some of these, since it only targets creatures, but it also is a little bit more versatile than cards that, for instance, can only target your own permanents, like Flicker Wisp. I lied. Flicker Wisp can target other permanents. I meant cards like Skybind, anything that can only target your own spells or permanents. From my knowledge from playing with blank type effects, the most common use is to get a second enter the battlefield trigger off of a creature with a good ETB trigger. Just looking at limited, there are so many, and I kind of had to narrow this down to my favorite interactions because there are just so many things that have enter the battlefield triggers. What are the best uses with the Displacer? There are kind of some generic effects that enter the battlefield, you get something good, like Goblin Dark Dwellers is going to let you cast a spell, Wall of Resurgence is going to let you build up a land, and if you're using the Displacer to blink these out, you just get more spells back, or you build more lands up, or you make one land really, really big, and you can do that very cheaply, since Displacer only costs 3 to activate. You can also synergize well with support. Expedition Raptor, for instance, supports 2 when it enters the battlefield. All the creatures with support trigger on entering the battlefield, so blanking them out and putting them back in the battlefield means you get more support. I like the interaction with support a lot more because it lets you build up Eldrazi Displacer as well. Every time a support creature comes in, you can throw one of those counters on the Displacer. So you're building up your key card plus some other card or group of cards, and it just works very, very well. You get to make extra scions if you're in combination with green or blue or something that's making extra scions. For instance, Birth and Hulk, Scion Summoner, Eyeless Watcher. If you're blinking those out every time they come back in, you get those extra scions, and you can actually use those scions to help trigger the ability for the colorless cost, which I'll go into a little bit more because there's a nice little interaction with it. Allies, it synergizes very well with Rally. If you don't have an ally in hand to trigger any Rally cards you might have from Battle for Zendikar, blink out one of your allies, it comes back in immediately, and you get to trigger Rally. It's a little awkward because the creature you blink out does come in tapped, so if you're looking to attack with it, it's not maybe the best interaction, but it is a little bit of an extra layer to ally decks, and it's also a white card, which fits in with the allies very well. If you're moving in kind of the blue-black direction, or you have some colorless cards, you get to process multiple times. Processing is kind of a little bit less important now that there's only one Battle for Zendikar pack, but any processors you have, along with Eldrazi Displacer, let you repeat the effect. Think of something like Wasteland Strangler, which is not unrealistic that people would pass this in the last pack. If you have something like Displacer, Wasteland Strangler, and a consistent source of exiling cards, this just gets really out of hand. -3/-3 every time you can trigger the Displacer's ability. Voidgrafter is a neat little trick. It does put you in 2 extra colors, so you'd have to be playing at least Bant colors to use them both. But since Displacer can't target itself, that means most removal is going to be targeted straight at Displacer, taking that out first. If you have Voidgrafter and enough mana to blink Voidgrafter, you can actually use Voidgrafter as a consistent source of giving your creatures hexproof, which means if they go to throw a removal spell at your Displacer, you can blink Voidgrafter, get it back immediately, and give Displacer hexproof and save it. Nice little interaction that I don't think is going to come up that often. Halimar Tidecaller is another one. Blink it out, get back an Awaken spell. All those Clutch of Currents, get back a Clutch of Currents, bounce something, awaken it if you have the extra mana, and then do it all over again next time you activate Displacer. I'll talk about this a little bit later on as well, because there's a nice little interaction that I think is worth pointing out. And finally, I think the dream is Reflector Mage. Just blink Reflector Mages, stop your opponent from replaying their creatures for a turn, and it's already in white, so you're only moving into one other color, whereas something like Voidgrafter would put you into other colors. These are just a couple of the cards that I pointed out. I could have made this bubble huge and just thrown every ETB trigger in, but these are some of the really standout ones from the last couple sets, with Rally and Support being kind of overall mechanics that work very well with Displacer. Another thing that you can do with blink effects is kind of use them as a means of attacking what your opponent is doing. For instance, enchantments. Enchantments are basically, auras specifically, are basically null and void against blinkers. Whatever has the enchantment on it, you just blink that creature. You can't target the enchantment itself, but once the creature is exiled, the enchantment gets removed, and the creature comes back in without the enchantment. Good for getting rid of Tightening Coils, Visions of Brutality. A couple other ones, you don't see the boosting ones very often, like Iona's Blessing or Goblin Warpaint, Untamed Hunger, but sometimes you get beat down by those cards, and blinking that creature out is just going to get rid of the aura. Part of the reason people don't play auras is interactions like that, but it's a very nice option to have. Awaken cards get a lot worse when you have a Displacer on your side of the field. Your opponent can awaken a land, but as soon as you blink that land out, it's gone, and it comes back in as a normal land without counters. So cards like Ondu Rise and anything with Awaken, any pseudo-Awaken cards from the new set, you can just blink those lands out and get rid of it as if they were never awakened in the first place. Control effects like Exert Influence or threaten effects like Active Aggression or Turn Against, I should say, since it's relevant to this set. Blinking those creatures out lets you get it back on your side of the field. Displacer does specify that the creature comes back in under its owner's control. Sometimes that's not on certain cards, but if your opponent takes your best thing with Exert Influence and you follow up with a Displacer, you can target the creature they took, and it'll actually come back into the battlefield on your side of the field. Creatures that get +1/+1 counters, you can reset that counter if it's out of hand by blinking the creature out. Things like Rot Shambler and Undergrowth Champion can get lots of counters over the span of a game, but as soon as you activate that ability, they come back in as 1/1s and 2/2s, and they're easy to finish off from there. I also want to give a nod to Displacer straight up killing Skyrider Elf. It comes back in as a 0/0, so 3 mana Murder Skyrider Elf is very good on a creature. Equipment becomes pretty much useless on your opponent's side of the field. They can equip as much equipment as they want to as many creatures as they want, and as soon as they enter combat, if you trigger that ability, they cannot equip that re-equip that combat for that turn's combat step. Equipment becomes borderline useless against a blinker. Removal and pumps also become way worse. Not necessarily the case with removal, because Eldrazi Displacer is kind of a lightning rod. It's going to take whatever first removal spell your opponent has, since your opponent's going to know they can't just send removal at your other creatures. You'll just blink that creature out in response. But this does let you protect your other creatures at least. They do have to take out that Displacer if you have open mana before they can do anything else. This can be relevant if you have creatures on the field that are just way bigger or more important than Displacer. They have to take that out first. Also, their pump spells are just not going to be doing that much work, since anytime you go to pump something, you're just going to blink it out. And then finally, token generators are much, much worse against blinkers. Blinking destroys a token, flat out gets rid of it. It doesn't come back in, it's gone. Seed Guardian's little token that he leaves behind, wipe it out. Eldrazi Displacer makes Desolation Twin look like a chump, just a 10 mana 10/10, big dumb creature. You kill the token, and you can even start using the ability to just make Desolation Twin tap down, not really do anything. I didn't give any examples, obviously, because it's not as straightforward, but you can use it as a defensive or offensive card in that you can just tap a dude down. If your opponent goes to combat and they have a big creature you can't really deal with, blink it out. It'll come back in tapped, and they can't attack with that turn. Same thing, you can basically lock down a blocker the same exact way. If you're on the offensive, tap your mana, blink their guy out. It comes back in tapped, and they can't block with it that turn. This is just a small amount of the things blinkers can do. It has other interactions outside of limited, other interactions I've not even named here. Just does so many things. This is a lot of things for one card to deal with for 3 mana. Think of all the versatility just being a handful of cards that I picked out. It has so many interactions for just one card, and it's such a unique card. It's the only card in this set that does something like that can affect all of these different dynamics in the game. I do want to point out, this is more cutesy than it is practical, but there are a couple infinite combos, and the first one being an actual infinite combo, the second one being kind of a not really infinite in the way, it's not going to win you the game, but we'll see. I think most people are aware of this, but this is an infinite combo that you can actually get while drafting or playing sealed if you have the cards. The first one starts out with Eldrazi Displacer and Brood Monitor. When Brood Monitor enters the battlefield, you get 3 Eldrazi Scion. You can sack those 3 Scion to make 3 colorless mana and trigger Displacer's effect. When you do that, you target the Brood Monitor, it exiles and comes back in immediately, and you get 3 more Scions. You can do that over and over again. Obviously, you're going to need some other component to turn that into a win, so you can use one of 2 cards in the set, either Flare Drone or Zulaport Cutthroat. Flare Drone says whenever a colorless creature enters your side of the battlefield, your opponent loses a life. So Brood Monitor and the 3 Scions drain your opponent for 4 a bit, essentially, and then you can use those Scions to start your cycle, and Flare Drone's ability will just drain your opponent out. Very similar to Cutthroat, which deals 1 damage and you gain a life whenever a creature you control dies. So every time you sack those Scions, you're hitting your opponent for 3 while gaining 3, and you just repeat, rinse, repeat until your opponent's dead. Also, a very slight nod to Impact Tremors, which can do the same thing in Standard, but isn't actually part of this set or this block. But 3 ways to go infinite with these 2 cards. It's a little awkward. It's not very practical because, first off, this is a green card, this is a white card, and then this is a black, and this is a black-red. So you're going at least 3 colors, not to mention one of them's a rare and the other 2 are uncommon. But the thing I do like is that each one of these cards here is individually very powerful. So if I open an Eldrazi Displacer, and then I say second pick, see a Flare Drone, I'll know that that combination is available. And I think the Mana Fixin's fine enough that you could pull off something like this. Maybe the top route with the Flare Drone would be a little bit of a stretch, but it's nice to know that that thing's there. The second one, this is not infinite in that it'll win you the game right away, but I do like the interaction a lot. First off, you need Displacer and Tidecaller. Again, Tidecaller, when it enters the battlefield, you get back a card with Awaken from your graveyard. Tidecaller also has the line of text where land creatures you control get flying. Now, what you do is you find 3 mana. You don't have infinite mana for this one, so you can only activate it maybe once or twice a turn. But you find 3 mana, you target Tidecaller, blink it out. When it comes back in, Tidecaller gets you one of these 2 cards, either Encircle and Fissure or Scatter to the Winds. And remember, Scatter to the Winds is rare, but the rest of these are uncommon. So with Encircle and Fissure, if you have 6 mana total, you can use 3 for Displacer, 3 for Encircle and Fissure, and just make it so that you basically can never take combat damage, or at least once per turn cycle, you're preventing all combat damage that will happen. So if you're not going on the offense, you can use this defensively, where for 3 mana, you blink out your Tidecaller, get back Encircle and Fissure, and then you know for a fact, if it's your opponent's turn, that you're not taking combat damage that turn. If you have the extra mana, you can actually start Awakening Encircle and Fissure, and start pumping up a big land for a big attack, and Tidecaller will actually give that big land flying. So kind of a repetitious thing to do. Obviously, if one of these dies to a removal spell, which is the same case up here, then it kind of foils the plan, but that's just going to be something that happens anyway. The alternative that I like is Scattered to the Winds, because for 6 mana, you basically always have a counter spell available to you. 3 mana to blink Tidecaller, and then 3 mana to cast Scatter, and you can do that on your next turn. Again, blink out the Tidecaller, get back your Scatter, and just counter anything relevant your opponent does. And you can do that while building up your side of the field, doing whatever it is you need to win, and with lots of mana you can start Awakening the Scatter as well. Obviously, this isn't going to win you the game on the spot. You do have to find another way to win, but it lets you kind of attack and block freely. The Encircle and Fissure part does, at least, and Scatter to the Winds means you don't have to worry about very many threats hitting the battlefield. Neat little interactions that don't require a lot of effort, but every card I've thrown up here is at least an uncommon. Some of them are rare, so I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I do like pointing it out. Moving on, you do have to also face the argument that people love to make about well, so-and-so dies to removal. Yes, that is true. Eldrazi Displacer does die to removal spells, and it actually gets hit by some of the best common spells in the set. Touch of the Void, Complete Disregard, both take it out. And Oath of the Gatewatch gave us some unconditional removal in spells like Oblivion Strike and Isolation Zone. So a lot of times you have to be prepared for this. Maybe 50, 60, maybe even higher % of the time, you're going to play your Displacer, and it's going to die before you start doing a lot of things with it. That's just kind of how bombs go. It doesn't have hexproof, it can't blink itself, so this is just going to happen, and you have to accept that. That's a bad excuse to not be excited about a bomb, though. Eldrazi Displacer just does so much that when your opponent doesn't have removal, it's going to take over the game, hands down. Also, there's an argument for the restrictive mana cost that Eldrazi Displacer requires. Like I said, it's kind of awkward in white decks just because of its colorlessness, even though you can just treat it as a white creature that blinks things, which is the right way to think about it. But a lot of times you'll be splashing it in other decks to get the blink advantage for other colors, and then really you're splashing white and also splashing colorless, so it kind of really puts a damper on what you can play for your mana base. I don't think this is really a problem. I think the mana fixin' in Oath of the Gatewatch is actually fine. At common, you have Holdout Settlement, Crumble and Vestige, even Unknown Shores, and you still have Evolve and Wilds, all ways to get different colors, and 3 of which will tap for colorless in addition to making that other color. They're all interesting, and they're all a little bit awkward in their own ways, but they'll get the job done with Eldrazi Displacer. The most important thing is to be able to make the white, since that's what you need to cast it, and then later on make sure you have the colorless, because you don't want it to be a dead card in your hand. You want it to be at least relevant if you need to slam something on the battlefield. Corrupted Crossroads just does everything you want, making colorless and colored mana without any sort of stipulations except for paying a life. But this is a rare land, so it's not going to come up very often in the same decks that you have the Displacer. So the arguments against it are not very strong, I don't think. I think it's still very worth taking and playing in whatever deck you're playing. So let's go over the pros real quick. Just to summarize, the card's extremely versatile. I've only listed a handful of things that it can do, and I've only mentioned things it does in limited. Think about when you blink a morph creature, it comes back into the battlefield unmorphed, face up. I don't know what kind of interactions that might have in standard, but it might be worth looking at. But the versatility in limited is just fantastic. Repeated enter the battlefield effects, killing tokens, making equipment useless, killing auras, resetting counters, regaining control of creatures. You know, everything I mentioned and everything I didn't mention. It just does so much. It's also just a good vanilla creature. Sometimes you're not going to be able to combo off. You're not going to be able to do great things. You're just going to have a slow hand, and you're going to have to play your 3/3 for 3. And whether it dies or not, it's still fine on that part of the curve, and actually above most of the other creatures on that part of the curve. It worked really good with the actual set's mechanics. Support and Rally are ETB-based mechanics, and Eldrazi Displacer lets you get a lot of value out of those creatures with those mechanics. And like I mentioned at some point in the video, it's a unique effect. It's not something that you can replace with a card you might get later in the draft or something like that. If you want or need this sort of effect, there's only one card in this set that's going to do it for you, and that is Eldrazi Displacer. On the flip side, it doesn't protect itself, which stops it from being a straight 5 out of 5. If it had some sort of hexproof or something, it would be absolutely insane. This keeps it from being the best of the best while still being a very bomb-type card that does a lot. And on that same note, the vulnerability to the specific removal spells in the set is something that is going to hold it back a little bit. Like I said, Touch of the Void, Complete Disregard, good number of other spells will take it down before it gets going. And the mana restrictions, obviously colorless is more of a splash, but you'll play this in any of your white decks, and you'll try to play it in any of your non-white decks, to be honest. I will jam it in almost any deck I see it in. So overall, that's Eldrazi Displacer. That's my spotlight for today. I think it is a bomb. I would throw that out there, and I think it's a card that I'm extremely excited to open. I look forward to seeing the interactions that I haven't even thought of yet, because cards like this just have so many interactions. It's absolutely insane. But I hope you guys like this video. I hope you guys maybe learn something new, or maybe you can tell me something new that I don't know. If you would, I would appreciate it if you like, comment, and subscribe so that I keep doing these videos. And in the comments below, I'd actually like to see what card you would like me to put in the spotlight. Is there something from Oath of the Gatewatch that you're really excited about? Something that you think could just be is worth talking about and seeing what you can do with it? Is there a card you think is absolutely terrible that needs to be put in the spotlight? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see if I can put together a video for you guys. Thanks for your time. Again, like, comment, subscribe. My name is Drake Swarm, and I hope you guys have a good one. Thanks.